Welcome back to Underrated History. This is Jason coming at you here, and I want to talk about the world leader. They always talk about Fidel Castro of Cuba being the one who has survived the most assassination attempts. Well, the leader I have in history today will tell Castro, hold my beer. And yes, they did exist at the same time. There was about a 20-year overlap between their particular runs as authoritarian leaders of their respective countries. However, the story of this man is just absolutely mind-blowing, even compared to Castro. Today I bring you the story of Yugoslavia's Josip Broz Tito. And Josip Broz Tito came into the picture. Yugoslavia, as you may know, was a country that was cobbled together with 6 competing nationalities under one umbrella. Tito himself was half Croatian and half Slovenian, and those are 2 of the countries that were inside of the Yugoslavian Federation, if you will. And the remarkable thing about Tito is he came to power in Yugoslavia in the late 40s, towards the back end of World War II, and then led Yugoslavia into a communist state, but was never part of the Iron Curtain or the Warsaw Pact. So Tito comes into power in the mid 1940s, towards the tail end of World War II, and he goes down in world history as the only leader to ever have both Hitler and Stalin as enemies. And I'm like, well, that's a pretty impressive feat, isn't it? Yes, it was. And this country, Yugoslavia, was held together by his sheer force of nature and sheer will. And these 6 nationalities were all held together in one piece of land in Southern Europe, bordering the Balkans. And the role that Tito had in World War II as the Yugoslav leader and general, mind you, is pretty significant in that his country was right in the line of the path between Hitler's Germany and North Africa, which was key to his energy campaign. And because he stood up to Nazi Germany, that pipeline was never what Hitler wanted it to be, of movement of troops or energy or oil or anything of that sort. So it was basically the Tito Wall at that point as far as Hitler was concerned. So needless to say, Hitler was not a fan of Tito. And after the World War II was over in the late 1940s, Tito then really grabbed an iron grip on Yugoslavia and consolidated his power in the way that it would ultimately would become for the rest of his life. And Tito was what would be called a benevolent dictator. He was a dictator. He ruled authoritarianly, but unlike some of his neighbors, such as Ceausescu in Romania and some others, particularly Hoxha in Albania, Tito, on the other hand, was actually insanely popular amongst his own citizens, in that he was and his country in the post-World War II era was generally considered to be the most prosperous communist country on the planet. And Tito had economic connections with the West, and the West relied on him as a buffer against Stalin. Now, Stalin, for this reason, couldn't stand the guy, but at the same time, he absolutely feared him, and he had every reason to fear him. And here's where the assassination attempts come in. Stalin sent dozens and dozens and dozens of assassins into Yugoslavia to try to kill this guy. One day, Tito wrote a letter back to Stalin And he said, "Please stop sending these men trying to kill me. If you keep sending these men to try to kill me, I will send my own to Moscow to kill you. And I guarantee you they will not miss." I know that certainly after this point, the assassination attempts on Tito came to a freezing stop because Stalin absolutely feared this man. The man who stood up to Hitler, acted as a buffer between Nazi Germany and North Africa, cut off that pipeline, which led to his defeat in North Africa. And then Stalin came to hate him, and because of this, the West actually propped up the Tito regime and propped up military, economically, and otherwise. So Yugoslavia was actually a friend. It was a communist country with authoritarian rule, but Tito was good friends with the United States. And here's how good friends he was. He came to the Truman and Eisenhower White Houses, and to this day, Josip Broz Tito is the only man who's ever been allowed to smoke in the White House. Before or since, no man has ever been allowed to smoke inside of the White House outside of Tito. That is how powerful, respected, and particularly in American sake, liked he was. America has not always, the countries that America has backed in the past have not always been democratic or have free elections in republics. Tito and Yugoslavia are a classic example of this. Another one that comes to mind, of course, is Manuel Noriega in Panama, which could be, it may not be an entirely different story on this channel, because I think most people who grew up in the 80s knew who Noriega was. And his overthrow, of course, is world history. Tito, however, never was overthrown. Tito died in 1980 of natural causes, cancer, I believe it was. And the craziest part is, in the years immediately after his passing, the nation of Yugoslavia broke up. It was basically the Balkan breakup, which leaves with today's current nations of Serbia, Slovenia, Croatia, Montenegro. How many is that? Is that 5? And Serbia. These are all independent countries on their own. After Tito's passing, this country was held together by Tito through the will of a single man, Josip Broz Tito. This man was so feared by so many people that nobody dared to try to break away until after he was gone. So that is, in a nutshell, the man responsible for the organization and holding together 6 rival nationalities under one flag. The man who stood up to Hitler, the man who defied Stalin and avoided most likely hundreds of assassination attempts by Stalin, which came to an end only after he sent that, I wouldn't even call it a threatening letter, it was a promise. He was absolutely not joking. And of course, after Stalin died himself in 1953, that came to an end. But even after that, Yugoslavia was never behind the Iron Curtain, was never part of the Warsaw Pact. Because Tito wanted to, he had to do it his way. He was not going to be subservient to Moscow or anybody else. Particularly when the original leader of post-World War II Soviet Union made hundreds of attempts to kill the man. I wouldn't be subservient to him either. But this is a force of nature who, in this particular day and age, doesn't get remembered very well because all of the countries that he held together are independent countries these days. And this man held them all together until his passing in 1980. So that, my friends, is the story of Josip Broz Tito, the man who survived hundreds of assassination attempts and defied both Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. Smoked in the White House, had the economic backing of the United States, despite politically not being aligned with each other, and remained an authoritarian communist country, but never fell under the Warsaw Pact. No other country, no other man has ever done this. And if he was around today, I believe he'd be thumbing his nose at Vladimir Putin as well. Those two men would not be friends. And if Putin had tried to assassinate Tito, I believe the results would have been the same. So anyway, guys, that was a fun one. Josip Broz Tito, the man who caused enemies on both sides of the Allies, and while being an authoritarian leader himself, much more loved than the men he defied in the forms of Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. Supreme badass in more ways than one. Hardly a perfect man. He definitely had a lot of authoritarian flaws, but people loved him. You know, he kept the Croatians and the Serbians from killing each other, and not only did this, but also united them under one flag. We haven't seen anything like this ever since. Vladimir Putin would love to do this, but he hasn't come anywhere close to accomplishing this because Putin came into power after the breakup of the Soviet Union, which was a very similar breakup to the way Yugoslavia fell apart after Tito's passing. Of course, the Soviet Union fell apart not because of one man's passing, but because of other reasons internally within the country that made it flawed. Tito made Yugoslavia not have those flaws. Economically blessed by the West under political philosophies of the East. So guys, enjoy your Saturday. It's been getting a little bit colder around here. Hope you guys have a good weekend. All's blessed over here as well. I thank you just so much for watching this through. This was a fun one. Peace out, homies.